Corporate cover-ups. They're hardly a modern invention. Pretty much as long as human beings have existed, people have attempted to cover up their mistakes in many cases, especially when those mistakes have dire consequences. Railroads are no exception to this. There have been times where something has happened and a railroad is at fault, and they're like, "What? What? No, we aren't. It wasn't. It was those guys. Those guys that don't actually exist, but we're gonna tell you they're real. Please don't sue us." And that's exactly what happened with the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, a Class 1 railroad that operated both freight and passenger services in the United States, chartered all the way back in 1850 by the Commonwealth of Kentucky. L&N turned out to be a very successful railroad, up until they were purchased in the 1980s by the Seaboard Coastline Railroad, who treated them as a subsidiary until the Seaboard themselves would merge with the C&O and B&O to become CSX, who now owns and operates all the former L&N lines. But we're not talking about any of that. That's another story. We're talking about an accident. A very bad accident known as the Cahaba Bridge Disaster, which occurred in 1896. The bridge in question had been constructed for the L&N by the Keystone Bridge Company, based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to bring the line over the Cahaba River. However, even prior to the bridge's construction, there were some concerns because it was noted that the braces for the bridge were undersized. They'd been shrunk down by several factors during the design phase, and some pointed out that the smaller bracings wouldn't actually be able to support much weight. The bridge itself could stand on its own, but not with a multi-ton train on top of it, let alone more than one passing over it every single day. Yet these concerns were ignored by both the bridge builders and L&N, and the bridge was built with the smaller bracings. But the bridge lasted for over a decade with no issues. It was constructed in 1884 and was meant to link the ore mines in Red Mountain to other mines in other areas. That section of line itself was technically the Birmingham Mineral Railroad, but they were owned by L&N, a subsidiary. And on Sunday morning, December 27th, 1896, just 2 days after Christmas, a train was traveling down the line with 31 people on board, men, women, and children. Most of the occupants were miners and their families who were returning from holiday revelries. After all, it was just Christmas, and the miners had been allowed to go visit other family members nearby. The railroad had even offered discounted rates during the holiday season, so it was a good deal for them. The train was relatively small, with only 2 passenger cars, each equipped with a coal heater, providing a warm and comfortable atmosphere for the passengers, and there was also a 3rd baggage car as well. The train was pulled by locomotive number 40, and no sources specify exactly what kind of steam engine she was, but it is known she was quite new. She'd only been built the previous year, 1895, by the Rogers Locomotive Works, considered the height of their own technology. They passed through several stations and there were no issues whatsoever. Locomotive number 40 was doing just fine, the passengers were happy and comfortable, and everything was going perfectly until they reached the bridge. 20 miles from Birmingham, at 7:50 a.m., the train began traveling over the bridge. There was no signs that anything was wrong, until the weight of the train caused some unexpected shuddering and vibrations. The engineer, Frank White, was experienced enough to know the shaking he was feeling actually wasn't normal at all. Something was wrong. And instead of trying to continue over the bridge, he attempted to reverse, but it was too late for that. Almost instantly, as the full weight of the train hit the bridge, the entire structure collapsed into pieces, and the train fell 110 feet into the river. Due to long-distance communication still being in its infancy back then, no one knew anything was wrong at first, and only 2 men were able to actually walk away from the accident under their own power. The fireman of number 40, incredibly, was still mobile. His name was Sam Stewart, and the only reason he survived is that he had opted to jump as the bridge collapsed. This meant he landed very hard at the edge of the river, and that broke his arm, but he was still able to walk. One of the passengers was also able to get free, one Mr. E. Eccles. He personally ran 4 miles to a telegraph station in Hargrove to report what had happened. But he discovered that people were on the way to help them because the noise of the collapse had been so massive that people heard it as far away as Hargrove. There were several men on horseback heading towards the accident who Mr. Eccles bumped into. He told them what had happened, and they continued onward to try to render whatever assistance they could. Eventually, authorities in Birmingham and Blockton would find out what had happened and send out rescue trains, but by the time they got there, things were horrific. The river at the time was relatively shallow, so the train had not sunk all the way. They were only in about 4 feet of water. But remember, the coaches had coal heaters, and as a result of the crash, those heaters had caught the wooden coaches on fire. Because of the twisted nature of the wrecked train, most people couldn't get out of the coaches. They were trapped, and as the fire spread, many were burned alive. One man, Henry Hanbury, had been pinned inside one of the coaches, unable to reach his wife and children. He was forced to watch, helplessly, as they were consumed by the fire. The rescuers did everything they could to save as many people as possible. The death toll was only limited by the fact that there weren't that many people involved. Remember, it was only a 31-passenger train, so this could have been much worse had the train been longer. Regardless, they still had to account for the many dead. In total, 5 railroad employees, including engineer White himself, were killed, along with 17 of the passengers. There were 9 injuries, and many of the bodies were difficult to identify because of the fire. A lot of them had to be ID'd using what remained of their clothes or their jewelry, which survived the inferno. Even during the rescue process, it wasn't without incident, because another one of the rescue trains that came later on that afternoon, 1 p.m., had been looking for a flagman to stop them before they got to the scene so they didn't slam into the other rescue train. But there was no flagman, and when they came around the final corner, they slammed into the other rescue train. Guys! We're already dealing with a horror show. We don't need more problems. Fortunately, this crash was not nearly that awful in the grand scheme of things. The impact had forced one of the rescue trains forward within 50 feet of the bridge, but they didn't actually fall through the bridge. 2 workers were injured in this crash, one of whom would die later of said injuries. So yeah, it was not, you guys aren't helping. Clearing up the rubble was completed as soon as possible, and an investigation soon followed. However, understand that it was later reported that at least one survivor said that he had spotted 3 looters rummaging through the wreckage because people are awful. They had been doing this while ignoring the fire and the cries of the wounded. This is before the rescuers even showed up. Additionally, just days prior to the accident, train robbers had messed with the line at another bridge, the McCombs Trestle. But not enough where they actually derailed a train. This resulted in the railroad reporting that the Cahaba Bridge crash was caused by train robbers who had removed a rail from the bridge. The news media took this claim at face value, condemning the men responsible, and a reward was even offered for anybody who could provide info leading to the capture of the perpetrators of this horrific act. Here's the thing, though. Other than the fact that there were train robbers in the area, and that story about the looters was probably credible, they had nothing to do with why the train crashed. Remember, the bracing on the bridge. Yeah? Yeah, about that. So both the Keystone Bridge Company and L&N had done proper investigations into it. L&N's investigator was a man named Richard Montfort, who did a phenomenal job finding the truth. He showed that it was the bracing. It was too small, smaller than the original plans had called for, and as a result of this, it had caused an overall weakening of the structural integrity of the bridge by at least 50%. It collapsing under the weight of a train was basically inevitable. And you might think, okay, well, you just sue the bridge builders. Keystone Bridge Company built the bridge, isn't it their fault? The problem is L&N knew about the flaw. They knew those braces were too small. Someone had told them years ago and they chose to ignore it, meaning both parties were liable. So, instead of admitting the truth, taking responsibility, paying out financial compensation to the victims, doing the right thing, no, don't be silly. A representative from the Keystone Bridge Company, named Emil Swinson, suggested they push the train robbers' story. Both companies quietly agreed to maintain this lie in any future legal proceedings, and as a result of concocting this conspiracy, it shielded both of them from any legal repercussions as a result of the accident. No train robbers were ever arrested in connection with it, because no train robbers had caused it. It was due to the bridge bracing not being up to standards. And both the railroad and the Keystone Bridge Company lied to protect themselves, not caring about the fact that people died horrifically as a result of their negligence. And the thing is, this totally worked. The conspiracy lasted. The lie lasted for decades. The truth wasn't determined until many years later, after literally everyone involved in the situation had died. In fact, it wasn't known until even L&N was no longer a thing. The only reason we know what happened now, we know the truth of the situation, is because of Richard Montfort's report. See, despite the fact that they were hiding everything from people, for whatever reason, that report was not destroyed. It was kept, and eventually discovered. After being gone through by historians, everyone was like, what? Wait, what? No way! Because all that time, everyone assumed that the train robber story was right. There was no evidence to the contrary. But now that we have L&N's own investigative report, well, that spurred other historians to do even further digging and discover that, yeah, actually, it's true. There weren't any train robbers involved here. The bridge just sucked. That's what happened. And 22 people died because of it. It's an absolutely horrible story that, while we do know the truth, it doesn't really involve any comeuppance because the truth wasn't discovered until way too late to do anything about it. You can't even punish the company anymore. They're not a thing now. What are you gonna do, sue CSX for something that happened over 100 years ago? They had nothing to do with it. Literally no one in their corporate infrastructure had anything to do with it. None of them were alive back then. So yeah, it's one of those things. But that's what happened. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.